Marcus Ellison stared in disbelief at his shackled hands. A 32-year-old father of two suddenly cast as a monster. Across the courtroom in case file 302, the prosecution had just finished painting the black man as a violent predator who had brutally assaulted an innocent wealthy woman in broad daylight. The murmuring gallery was silenced only when Judge Harlan Whitfield bellowed for order, his gavel cracking like a gunshot. Already the jury's eyes held quiet condemnation, convinced they were looking at a liar bound for a long prison sentence. They were dead wrong. The truth remained deeply buried, waiting for a single forgotten camera to shatter the lies and deliver a reckoning no one saw coming. The air inside the Cook County Courthouse was stale, smelling of floor wax, old paper, and nervous sweat. Outside, a bleak rain lashed against the tall arch windows, casting long gray shadows across the faces of the jury. Marcus Ellison sat rigid at the defense table. He wore a borrowed gray suit that was slightly too tight across his broad shoulders. His hands, rough and calloused from years of running his own independent landscaping business, were clasped tightly in his lap. He was trying to stop them from shaking. A few feet away, at the prosecution's table, sat Victor Langham. Langham was a man who moved with the predatory confidence of a lawyer who hadn't lost a high-profile case in recent years. He was immaculate, from his slicked-back, dark hair to his tailored Italian suit. When Langham stood to deliver his opening statement, the courtroom fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Langham began, his voice a smooth, resonant baritone that commanded absolute attention. He walked slowly toward the jury box, making deliberate eye contact with each of the 12 men and women. On that afternoon, the sanctity of a quiet, upscale neighborhood was shattered. Vivian Ashford, a respected philanthropist and devoted wife, walked out of her home to inspect some yard work. She expected a brief conversation with a contractor. Instead, she encountered a monster. Marcus flinched at the word. Beside him, his defense attorney, Lena Whitaker, placed a reassuring, firm hand on his forearm. Lena was sharp, a former public defender who had moved to private practice but never lost her street fighter edge. Her eyes remained locked on Langham, calculating his every move. "The defendant, Marcus Ellison," Langham continued, pointing a perfectly manicured finger directly at Marcus, "was hired to landscape the Ashford estate. But when a dispute arose over the quality of the work, the defendant did not act like a professional. He acted out of rage, he acted out of greed. The evidence will show that Marcus Ellison struck Mrs. Ashford across the face, knocking her to the pavement. As she lay there, bleeding and terrified, he forcefully stripped a valuable diamond anniversary ring from her finger before fleeing the scene." A collective gasp rippled through the gallery. In the second row, Marcus's wife, Aisha, pressed a tissue to her mouth, tears streaming down her cheeks. Marcus couldn't bear to look back at her. The shame, even though he was entirely innocent, was a crushing physical weight on his chest. "The defense will try to tell you this is a misunderstanding," Langham sneered, turning his back on Marcus. "They will try to cast doubt, but you will hear from the victim herself. You will hear from the decorated detective who apprehended the defendant fleeing the neighborhood, sweating, erratic, and aggressive. The truth is simple, and it is brutal. Marcus Ellison is guilty of aggravated assault and grand larceny. And by the end of this trial, you will have no choice but to convict." When Langham returned to his seat, he shared a brief, knowing glance with the woman sitting in the front row behind him, Vivian Ashford. She wore a high-necked cream blouse, a faint yellowish bruise still visible on her left cheekbone. She looked fragile, frightened, and perfect. Judge Whitfield nodded to the defense table. "Ms. Whitaker, your opening statement." Lena stood, buttoning her navy blazer. She didn't possess Langham's theatrical flair, but she had an earnest, piercing intensity. She walked to the center of the room. "Good morning," Lena said, her voice clear and ringing. "Mr. Langham just told you a very compelling story. It has a victim, a villain, and a heroic police officer. It belongs in a Hollywood movie because that is exactly what it is. Fiction." Lena turned and gestured to Marcus. "Marcus Ellison is not a monster. He is a father, a husband, and a small business owner who has worked long days over many years to build his company, Ellison Landscaping. On that afternoon, he completed a weeks-long terracing project at the Ashford estate, a project Mrs. Ashford decided she simply did not want to pay for." Lena stepped closer to the jury. "This is not a case of robbery and assault. This is a case of weaponized privilege. When Mr. Ellison demanded his rightful payment, Mrs. Ashford refused. When he told her he would file a mechanic's lien against her property, she became irate. She threatened him, and when he walked away to his truck, she made good on that threat by calling 911 and fabricating a violent crime to ruin a man's life rather than pay her bill. The jury looked skeptical. It was a hard pill to swallow. Why would a wealthy woman go to such lengths? Mr. Langham asked you to look at the evidence, Lena concluded softly. I ask you to do the exact same thing. Look past the tears. Look past the expensive clothes. Look at the facts. Because the facts will show that Marcus Ellison is an innocent man caught in a terrifying web of lies. As Lena sat down, Marcus whispered, "Do you think they believed any of that?" Lena didn't look at him, her eyes fixed on the prosecution table. They don't have to believe it yet, Marcus. We just have to make them doubt her. But it's going to be a bloodbath. The prosecution calls Vivian Ashford to the stand, Victor Langham announced. The courtroom was dead silent as Vivian stood. She walked with a slight, almost imperceptible limp, a detail that hadn't been in the original police report but played beautifully to the jury. She took the oath, her voice trembling just enough to convey trauma without sounding weak. She took her seat in the witness box, clutching a small linen handkerchief. Langham approached her with a gentle, paternal demeanor. Mrs. Ashford, I know this is incredibly difficult for you. Can you tell us what happened on that afternoon? Vivian took a deep, shuddering breath. She looked directly at the jury, her blue eyes wide and brimming with unshed tears. Mr. Ellison had been working on our property for some time. That afternoon, he told me he was finished. I went outside to inspect the retaining wall he built. It was crumbling. The stones were loose. I told him very politely that I couldn't issue the final payment until it was fixed to a safe standard. And how did the defendant react to that? Langham prompted. He snapped, Vivian whispered, a tear finally spilling over her lashes. His face twisted. He started screaming at me, cursing. He said I owed him, that people like me always try to cheat people like him. I was terrified. I took a step back, and that's when he hit me. She brought the handkerchief to her mouth, stifling a sob. He struck me so hard my vision went white. I fell backward onto the driveway. Before I could even scream, he was on top of me. He grabbed my left hand. He was twisting my fingers, pulling at my anniversary ring. It hurt so much. He ripped it off, spat on me, and ran to his truck. The jury was spellbound. Two of the jurors, older women in the front row, were glaring at Marcus with absolute disgust. Marcus felt his heart pounding violently against his ribs. It was a flawless performance. She was lying through her teeth, weaving a narrative so tight and convincing that even Marcus felt a momentary surreal disorientation. Thank you, Mrs. Ashford, Langham said softly. Your witness, Miss Whitaker. Lena stood up, carrying a yellow legal pad. She didn't offer a gentle smile. Mrs. Ashford, you testified that Mr. Ellison hit you hard enough to knock you down and then wrestled the ring off your finger. Yes, Vivian said, lifting her chin defiantly. Mr. Ellison is 6'2" and weighs 210 pounds. He works with his hands all day, Lena stated, pacing slowly. According to your medical report from that afternoon, you suffered a mild contusion on your left cheek. No concussion, no fractures, no defensive bruising on your arms, no swelling or scraping on your ring finger. Isn't it remarkable that a man of his size, violently ripping a tight ring off your finger while pinning you down, left absolutely no marks on your hands? Vivian blinked, her composure wavering for a fraction of a second. He pulled it off quickly and the ground broke my fall. The asphalt driveway broke your fall without leaving a single scrape on your palms or elbows? Lena pressed, her voice rising. Objection! Badgering the witness, Langham barked. Sustained. Ms. Whitaker, dial it back, Judge Whitfield warned. Lena pivoted. Mrs. Ashford, your property is surrounded by houses. Your landscaper was supposedly screaming, you were assaulted, yet none of your neighbors heard a thing. Not a shout, not a scream. I was in shock. The breath was knocked out of me. I couldn't scream, Vivian replied smoothly, recovering her poise. I just lay there until I found the strength to crawl inside and call the police. Lena dug in, pointing out minor timeline discrepancies and highlighting the lack of physical evidence. But Vivian was a stone wall. She had been prepped perfectly. When Lena sat down, the damage to Marcus's case was palpable in the room. The prosecution's next witness drove the nail deeper. Detective Harlan Reese swaggered to the stand. Reese was a veteran with a thick neck and a reputation for fast closures. Detective Reese, where did you locate the defendant following the 911 call? I intercepted his vehicle about 2 miles from the Ashford estate, heading toward the highway, Reese testified, his voice loud and authoritative. I initiated a traffic stop. The suspect, Marcus Ellison, was highly agitated. He was sweating profusely. When I asked him to step out of the vehicle, he was belligerent and non-compliant. He kept shouting that the victim was trying to screw him over. Did his demeanor strike you as consistent with someone who had just committed a violent robbery? Langham asked. Absolutely, Reese said without hesitation. He had the adrenaline dump, the aggression, and the flight response. During cross-examination, Lena attacked the missing evidence. Detective Reese, you arrested my client shortly after the alleged assault. You searched his person. You searched his truck. Did you find Mrs. Ashford's diamond ring? No, ma'am, Reese admitted, though his tone remained smug. But the route from the estate to the traffic stop borders a dense wooded park and a storm drain system. He had ample time and opportunity to toss the ring out the window to hide the evidence, planning to retrieve it later. Ample time, Lena scoffed. You are testifying on assumption, detective. You found no ring, you found no blood on his clothes, you found no skin under his fingernails. You found a man who was sweating because he had just spent hours hauling stone, who was angry because he was being pulled over for no reason. Isn't that correct? I found a suspect fleeing a crime scene, Reese fired back, leaning into the microphone. And I did my job. The prosecution rests, Your Honor. Victor Langham buttoned his suit jacket and sat down, a faint, victorious smile playing on his lips. Judge Whitfield banged his gavel and called for a brief recess before the defense would begin its case. In the small, windowless holding room adjacent to the courtroom, the silence was deafening. Marcus sat at the metal table, his head buried in his hands. The sheer, terrifying weight of the system was crushing him. The prosecution hadn't needed hard proof. They only needed a wealthy, tearful victim and a confident cop. They had painted a picture so vivid that the lack of physical evidence was dismissed as a minor technicality. I'm going to prison, Lena, Marcus whispered, his voice cracking. He looked up, his eyes bloodshot and haunted. I'm going to lose Aisha. I'm going to miss my kids growing up, over a bill and a lie. How is this happening? Lena was pacing the length of the tiny room, furiously chewing on the end of a pen. She stopped and looked at him. You are not going to prison. Not if I can help it. But Marcus, I have to level with you. They built a strong emotional narrative. Vivian Ashford played the jury like a grand piano. Because she's lying. Marcus slammed his fist on the table, the metal rattling. She slapped herself. I watched her do it. When I told her I was putting a lien on her house, she went crazy. She grabbed my shirt. I backed away and she literally punched herself in the cheek and screamed, "Let's see who the cops believe, you piece of trash." I thought she was just having a breakdown. I didn't think she'd actually call the cops. I know, Marcus. I believe you, Lena said, her voice dropping to a low, intense register. But we have a classic he said, she said, and in this county with that jury, she said is winning. We don't have a camera on her driveway. We don't have an eyewitness. So what do we do? Lena took a deep breath. You take the stand. It's the biggest risk in criminal defense. But if you don't look those jurors in the eye and tell them exactly what happened, Langham's story is the only one they'll take into the deliberation room. You have to be calm, Marcus. No matter what Langham says to you, do not get angry. If you show a flash of temper, you validate everything Vivian Ashford said. A short while later, Marcus was sworn in. Sitting in the witness box, he felt naked. The eyes of the jury burned into him. He looked out into the gallery and found Aisha. She gave him a tiny, trembling nod. Under Lena's gentle questioning, Marcus told his story. He spoke about his business, the pride he took in his work, and the grueling labor at the Ashford estate. He detailed the confrontation. He explained how Vivian Ashford had belittled him, used racial slurs when he demanded payment, and threatened to destroy his reputation. He testified under oath that he never touched her, that she struck herself in a fit of spite, and that he drove away in fear of what she might do next. He was credible. He was earnest. For a brief moment, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted. Then, Victor Langham stood up for cross-examination. Langham didn't walk to the podium. He strolled right up to the witness box, invading Marcus's space. Mr. Ellison, that was quite a story. Very creative. It's the truth, Marcus said, keeping his voice level. The truth? Langham laughed sharply, a sound that cut through the tension. You want this jury to believe that a woman with zero criminal record, a woman who sits on the board of 3 local charities, decided on a Tuesday afternoon to viciously punch herself in the face just to frame her landscaper? She was angry about the mechanic's lien, Marcus insisted. She didn't want to pay. Mrs. Ashford's husband, Reginald Ashford, is the CEO of a tech firm, Langham countered, his voice booming. Their net worth is estimated at over $40 million, and you expect this jury to believe she fabricated a violent felony over a landscaping bill? Rich people don't like being told what to do, Marcus said tightly. Ah, so now it's class warfare, Langham mocked, turning to the jury with a theatrical shrug. Or maybe, Mr. Ellison, you realized she wasn't going to pay you for your shoddy work. Maybe you felt disrespected. Maybe your temper, the same temper Detective Reese witnessed when he pulled you over, got the better of you. You hit her. You took her ring as collateral. And now you're sitting here committing perjury to save your own skin. I didn't touch her, Marcus raised his voice, leaning forward. I never laid a finger on her. No further questions, Langham snapped immediately, turning his back on Marcus and leaving the echo of Marcus's raised voice hanging in the air. Marcus felt his stomach drop. He had shown anger. He had done exactly what Lena told him not to do. He looked at the jury. Their faces were stone. He had lost them. Judge Whitfield looked at Lena. Miss Whitaker, any redirect? Lena stood up slowly. She looked defeated. Her shoulders slumped. No, Your Honor. The defense. Suddenly, the heavy wooden doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. A man in a wrinkled trench coat slipped into the room, breathing heavily as if he had run up the courthouse steps. It was Elias Thornton, Lena's private investigator. The bailiff stepped forward to intercept him, but Elias bypassed him, rushing straight up the center aisle to the low wooden gate, separating the gallery from the court. Elias leaned over the gate and aggressively hissed, Lena! Judge Whitfield slammed his gavel. Order! Who is this man? Counsel, control your staff. Lena quickly walked to the gate. Elias didn't apologize. He grabbed Lena's arm and shoved a small silver USB flash drive into her palm. He leaned in, whispering rapidly into her ear. Marcus watched from the witness stand. He saw Lena's eyes widen in shock. The color drained from her face, and then slowly a fierce, terrifying light ignited in her eyes. She gripped the flash drive so hard her knuckles turned white. Lena turned back to the judge. Her posture completely transformed. She stood ramrod straight. The aura of defeat entirely vanished. Your Honor, Lena said, her voice ringing out with a startling new authority. The defense has just received a piece of newly discovered evidence. Evidence that definitively proves my client's innocence. I need a brief recess to review this in chambers, and then I intend to recall a witness to the stand. Langham scoffed loudly. Objection, this is a stunt. The defense was about to rest. It is no stunt, Mr. Langham, Lena said coldly, holding up the tiny silver flash drive for the entire courtroom to see. I promise you it is the absolute truth, and it is going to change everything. Judge Harlan Whitfield's private chambers smelled of old leather, lemon polish, and the distinct bitter scent of Victor Langham's rapidly mounting anxiety. The room was cramped, dominated by a massive mahogany desk. Rain continued to lash against the single window. Behind the desk sat Judge Whitfield, his robes discarded over the back of his chair, revealing a crisp white shirt and suspenders. To his left stood Victor Langham, arms crossed, exuding a forced aura of impatience. To his right stood Lena Whitaker and her private investigator, Elias Thornton. Elias, still breathing heavily, was hooking his battered silver laptop to a small external monitor on the judge's desk. This is highly irregular, Ms. Whitaker, Judge Whitfield rumbled, peering over his reading glasses. The defense was seconds away from resting. Bringing in unvetted, unverified digital media at the 11th hour is dangerously close to a mistrial offense. I object to all of this, Your Honor, Langham snapped, checking his gold watch. It's a desperate Hail Mary, a delay tactic. They know the jury is ready to convict. Chain of custody hasn't been established, and we have no idea what fabricated nonsense is on this drive. Lena didn't look at Langham. Her eyes were locked on the judge. Your Honor, the prosecution's entire case rests on the sworn testimony of Vivian Ashford. Mr. Thornton has spent recent weeks canvassing the neighborhood looking for anything the police missed, or more accurately, Anything Detective Reese didn't bother to look for. Today he found it. Found what? Whitfield demanded. Elias cleared his throat, tapping a key on his laptop. 2 houses down from the Ashford estate lives a man named Gregory Caldwell. He's a corporate auditor, spends much of each month in London. He just got back from Heathrow a short while ago. I caught him as he was pulling his luggage out of his Uber. His personal vehicle, a high-end Tesla Model S, was parked on the street directly across from the Ashford property recently. Langham rolled his eyes. Fascinating. A parked car. A parked car with Sentry mode, Elias corrected, a hard edge to his voice. For those unfamiliar, Sentry mode utilizes the vehicle's external cameras to monitor the surroundings. It's motion activated. If someone walks by, it records. If a truck drives by, it records. And because Mr. Caldwell had a terabyte hard drive plugged into his dash system, it recorded in ultra-high definition 4K video. I asked him to review the footage from that day. Elias clicked the mouse. A video file opened on the screen. Watch carefully, Lena said softly. The screen flickered to life, showing a crystal-clear, wide-angle view of the Ashford driveway. The colors were slightly muted by the overcast weather of that day, but the detail was astonishing. There, parked in the driveway, was Marcus's familiar white landscaping truck. And standing near the rear tailgate were Marcus Ellison and Vivian Ashford. Langham leaned forward, his arrogant posture stiffening. The footage had no audio, but the body language was unmistakable. Marcus was holding a clipboard, gesturing calmly to the stone retaining wall. Vivian was shaking her head violently. Even without sound, the aggressive posture of the wealthy socialite was stark. She stepped into Marcus's personal space, pointing a finger aggressively at his chest. Marcus took a step back, holding his hands up in a placating, non-threatening manner. He said something, shook his head, turned, and got into the cab of his truck. He closed the door. The engine exhaust puffed, and the truck slowly backed out of the driveway and drove away, disappearing off camera. There was no assault. There was no struggle. He never touched her. Judge Whitfield let out a long, slow breath. My God. But the video wasn't over. On screen, Vivian Ashford stood alone in her driveway for a short while, staring after the truck. Then her demeanor shifted from anger to something entirely different. Cold calculation. She looked up and down the empty street. Satisfied she was alone, she raised her left hand. With deliberate twisting motions, she pulled her sparkling diamond anniversary ring off her finger. She walked briskly toward the front porch of her mansion. Sitting on the wide stone steps was a large hollow ceramic owl, a decorative piece meant to scare away birds. Vivian reached into the open back of the owl, shoved the ring deep inside, and pulled her hand out empty. She hid the ring, Langham whispered, the color draining from his perfectly tanned face. No, wait, Elias said grimly. Keep watching. Vivian walked back to the spot in the driveway where the argument had occurred. She knelt down on the asphalt. She picked up a smooth, heavy river stone from the landscaping bed Marcus had just finished detailing. She held the stone in her right hand, took a deep breath, and violently struck herself on the left cheekbone. She dropped the stone. She lay down on the driveway, positioned herself on her back, and pulled out her cell phone. The video ended with her dialing 3 digits. The silence in the judge's chambers was absolute, heavy, and suffocating. Lena turned to the prosecutor. Still think it's a Hail Mary, Victor? Victor Langham looked physically ill. His undefeated record, his political ambitions, his pristine reputation, all of it was currently tied to a woman who had just been caught on high-definition video committing perjury, filing a false police report, and attempting to destroy an innocent man's life. This could be altered. AI generation is highly sophisticated. Save it for a press conference, Langham, Judge Whitfield barked, his voice laced with absolute fury. The judge stood up, his face a mask of barely contained rage. He pointed a trembling finger at the screen. That woman sat in my courtroom, looked at 12 citizens of this county, and wept. She swore an oath to God and tried to send a father to state prison out of sheer spite. Your Honor, the prosecution requests a recess to evaluate, Langham began, desperate to stop the bleeding. Request denied, Whitfield roared. He grabbed his robes and violently shrugged them on. You built this house of cards, Mr. Langham, and you are going to be sitting at the table when it collapses. Miss Whitaker, you will recall Mrs. Ashford to the stand immediately. We are going to play this video for the jury, And let me be perfectly clear. I have already dispatched 2 of my bailiffs to the Ashford residence with a warrant to search that ceramic owl. If that ring is in there, Judge Whitfield didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The promise of hard, unforgiving justice hung in the air. "Let's go," Whitfield commanded, marching toward the door. "It's time for the truth." The atmosphere in Case File 302 had shifted from tense to suffocatingly curious. The jury murmured among themselves. Marcus sat at the defense table, his hands sweating, watching Lena return from chambers. She looked different. The exhaustion that had weighed her down earlier was entirely gone, replaced by the lethal, focused energy of an apex predator circling its prey. Victor Langham followed behind her, looking as though he were walking to his own execution. He slumped into his chair and stared blankly at his legal pad. "All rise," the bailiff called out as Judge Whitfield took the bench. The judge's face was like carved granite. "Be seated," Whitfield commanded. The gavel hit the block with a terrifying finality. "Ms. Whitaker, you requested to recall a witness." "Yes, Your Honor," Lena said, her voice carrying clearly to every corner of the room. "The defense recalls Vivian Ashford to the stand." A wave of confusion washed over the gallery. In the front row, Vivian Ashford frowned. She looked to Langham for guidance, but the prosecutor refused to meet her eyes. Hesitantly smoothing down her designer skirt, Vivian stood and made the long walk back to the witness box. She took her seat, looking slightly annoyed by the inconvenience. "Mrs. Ashford, you are still under oath," Judge Whitfield reminded her, his voice devoid of any of its previous gentleness. "I understand, Your Honor," Vivian said, lifting her chin. A heavy AV cart with a large flat-screen television was rolled into the center of the courtroom, directly facing the jury box and the witness stand. Elias Thornton plugged his laptop into the screen. Lena approached the podium. "Mrs. Ashford, earlier today you testified that Marcus Ellison struck you in the face, knocking you to the ground." "Yes, and he did," Vivian said firmly. "You also testified that while you were on the ground, he forcefully ripped your diamond ring from your finger." "I did, because it happened." Vivian's voice took on a sharp, defensive edge. "Why are we going over this again? I've already relived this trauma." "Because, Mrs. Ashford, the defense has acquired new evidence," Lena said, pressing a button on a remote control in her hand. "Evidence taken from a neighbor's vehicle security system, which had a clear line of sight to your driveway on that day." Vivian's breath hitched. It was a microscopic reaction, but Marcus saw it. The arrogant mask slipped, revealing a flash of pure, unadulterated terror beneath. "Let's watch, shall we?" Lena clicked the remote. The large screen flared to life. The jury leaned forward as one unified body. The video played. They watched the silent argument. They watched Marcus Ellison hold his hands up in surrender, get into his truck, and drive away. A collective stunned silence fell over the room. Marcus felt a massive, crushing weight lift off his chest. He looked at Aisha in the gallery. She had both hands pressed over her mouth, tears of absolute relief streaming down her face. But the video wasn't done. Lena paused the footage right as Vivian raised her left hand. "Mrs. Ashford, what are you doing in this frame?" Vivian was trembling. The microphone picked up the ragged, shallow sound of her breathing. I was checking my hand. My ring was loose." "Let's continue," Lena said mercilessly. She pressed play. The jury watched, horrified, as the wealthy philanthropist pulled her own ring off, marched up to her porch, and stuffed it into the ceramic owl. A loud gasp erupted from the jury box. Juror number 4, one of the older women who had glared at Marcus with such hatred earlier, actually covered her eyes, her face flushing crimson with righteous anger at the deception. "Objection!" Langham weakly managed, half standing. He didn't even know what he was objecting to. It was just muscle memory. "Sit down, Mr. Langham," Judge Whitfield snapped with enough force to make the lawyer flinch. On screen, Vivian walked back to the driveway. She picked up the Riverstone, and then, in glorious, undeniable 4K resolution, she smashed the rock into her own face, dropped it, and lay down to call the police. Lena paused the video on the final frame of Vivian lying comfortably on the asphalt, phone in hand. The courtroom erupted. Spectators were shouting. Reporters in the back row were frantically typing on their phones, realizing they had just witnessed the legal implosion of the decade. Aisha was openly sobbing, gripping the wooden rail in front of her. "Order! Order in my court!" Judge Whitfield banged his gavel repeatedly until the noise subsided to a hostile buzzing murmur. Lena stepped away from the podium and walked directly toward Vivian. Vivian was gripping the edges of the witness box so tightly her knuckles were white. Her perfect makeup could not hide the sickly pale shade of her skin. "Mrs. Ashford," Lena said, her voice dripping with contempt. "Did Marcus Ellison strike you?" That video is altered," Vivian stammered, her voice shrill and panicked. She looked desperately at her husband, Reginald, sitting in the front row. Reginald was staring at the screen, his jaw dropped in sheer disgust. He slowly turned to look at his wife as if she were a monster he didn't recognize. "Reginald, tell them it's a fake. It's AI." "It is not a fake, Mrs. Ashford," Lena said calmly, "because while we were in the judge's chambers a short while ago reviewing this footage, Judge Whitfield dispatched 2 county bailiffs to your home. Those bailiffs looked inside the ceramic owl on your front porch," Lena continued, delivering the final fatal blow, "and they recovered a valuable diamond anniversary ring. The exact ring you swore under oath Marcus Ellison stole from you." Vivian let out a pathetic, choked whimper. She looked at Langham, but the prosecutor was staring down at the floor, abandoning her completely. She looked at the jury. Their faces were twisted in revulsion and anger. They had been played, manipulated by her tears, and they wanted blood. "Why, Mrs. Ashford?" Lena asked, leaning against the wooden rail. "Why try to destroy a man's life over a bill?" The pressure in the room finally broke her. Vivian's pristine facade shattered entirely. "Because he was arrogant!" Vivian shrieked, her voice echoing wildly off the high ceilings. "He's a laborer. He works for me. He doesn't get to threaten me with a lien on my property. He doesn't get to demand things from me. I told him to fix the wall and he refused. He needed to learn his place." The admission hung in the air, toxic and vile. Lena stared at her for a long moment, letting the horrific reality of Vivian's words sink into every corner of the room. Then she turned her back on the witness box. "No further questions, Your Honor." Judge Whitfield looked down at Vivian Ashford with an expression of profound, unadulterated disgust. He didn't ask Victor Langham for a redirect. He didn't ask the jury to deliberate. "Mrs. Ashford," Judge Whitfield said, his voice dropping to a terrifying quiet rumble. "In my 30 years on the bench, I have seen murderers, thieves, and gang leaders sit in that chair, but I have rarely seen a display of such malicious, calculated, and sociopathic entitlement as I have witnessed from you today." Vivian shrunk back in her chair, tears, real ones this time, spilling down her face. "Your Honor, please." "Silence!" Whitfield roared. The judge turned to the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, there are rare occasions in the pursuit of justice where the evidence presented is so overwhelmingly clear, so incontrovertibly exonerating, that to allow a trial to proceed would be a miscarriage of justice in itself." Judge Whitfield turned to Marcus. His eyes softened, the anger fading into deep sympathy. "Mr. Ellison." Marcus stood. His legs felt like lead, but his spine was straight. "Mr. Ellison, the justice system failed you today. It was weaponized against you by someone who believed their wealth and status made them untouchable. I cannot give you back the weeks of terror you and your family have endured, but I can give you your freedom. I am issuing a directed verdict of not guilty. The charges against you are dismissed with prejudice. You are a free man." Marcus closed his eyes as a profound, ragged sob tore from his throat. He felt Lena's hand on his shoulder squeezing tight. Behind him, Aisha cried out his name. "As for you," Judge Whitfield said, turning his lethal gaze back to Vivian. He signaled to the bailiff standing by the door. "Bailiff, take Mrs. Ashford into custody." "What?" Vivian shrieked, scrambling backward in the wooden chair. "No! Reginald! Reginald, do something!" 2 large-armed bailiffs moved swiftly down the aisle. "You are to be held in the county lockup without bail," Judge Whitfield dictated, signing a piece of paper on his desk with vicious, heavy strokes. "Pending formal charges by the district attorney for perjury, filing a false police report, evidence tampering, and malicious prosecution." "And Mr. Langham?" Victor Langham stood up slowly, looking thoroughly defeated. "Yes, Your Honor. I expect your office to pursue those charges to the absolute fullest extent of the law. If I find out you offered her a sweetheart plea deal because of her zip code, I will personally see you disbarred." "Do I make myself clear?" "Crystal clear, Your Honor," Langham muttered. "Reginald!" Vivian screamed as the bailiff grabbed her wrists, pulling her arms behind her back. The sharp metallic click of handcuffs echoed loudly in the stunned courtroom. It was a sound Marcus had heard on his own wrists just hours ago. Now it was the sound of hard karma coming full circle. Vivian struggled, twisting wildly to look at her husband. "Reginald, call our lawyers. Tell them to stop this." Reginald Ashford stood up. He adjusted his expensive suit jacket. He looked at his wife, shackled and hysterical in the center of the courtroom. He didn't look angry anymore. He just looked incredibly tired. "I'll call my lawyers, Vivian," Reginald said coldly, his voice carrying over her screams, "to draft the divorce papers." With that, the millionaire turned on his heel and walked out of the courtroom, leaving his wife to be dragged away by the deputies. Her screams echoing down the marble hallways of the courthouse, fading into the oblivion she had created for herself. The heavy brass-studded doors of the Cook County Courthouse swung open and the rain had finally stopped, replaced by the blinding chaotic strobe of 100 camera flashes. News of the spectacular courtroom implosion had leaked instantly. By the time Marcus Ellison walked out into the crisp afternoon air, flanked by Lena Whitaker and a heavily breathing Elias Thornton, the concrete steps were swarming with local and national press. "Mr. Ellison! Mr. Ellison! Over here!" shouted Elias Thornton, a veteran legal correspondent for the Chicago Tribune. "How does it feel to be vindicated? Are you planning to sue the city?" Marcus held up a hand to shield his eyes from the glare. He looked at the sea of microphones thrust toward his face. A few hours ago, these same cameras would have captured the perp walk of a convicted felon. Now they were documenting the survival of an innocent man. He pulled his wife, Aisha, close to his side, kissing the top of her head. "I just want to go home," Marcus said, his voice raspy from the emotional exhaustion. "I want to see my kids and I want to get back to work." Lena stepped up to the microphones, her eyes gleaming with the dangerous, victorious energy of a shark that had just cleared the waters. "Let me be abundantly clear to everyone watching," she announced, her voice slicing through the clamor of the press. What happened today was not merely a misunderstanding. It was the malicious weaponization of the justice system by an individual who believed her wealth made her exempt from the law. Marcus Ellison is an innocent man who survived a nightmare, and, starting tomorrow morning, my office will be initiating a comprehensive civil action against the city of Chicago, the Cook County Police Department, and Mrs. Vivian Ashford personally. We are going to ensure that the people who orchestrated this witch hunt pay for every single second of terror they inflicted upon the Ellison family. While Marcus drove home to the tearful, joyous embraces of his children, a very different reality was closing in around Vivian Ashford, 17 miles away, inside the bleak concrete fortress of the Cook County Department of Corrections. The scent of expensive French perfume was replaced by the stench of industrial bleach, stale sweat, and despair. Vivian sat shivering on a bolted metal bench in a holding cell. The designer blouse she had worn to court had been confiscated, replaced by an abrasive, faded orange jumpsuit that was 2 sizes too large. Her custom hair extensions had been removed during the mandatory contraband search, leaving her natural hair looking thin and ragged. The heavy steel door rattled open. Vivian leaped to her feet, expecting to see her husband's private fixer, or at the very least, a high-priced defense attorney carrying a briefcase full of bail documents. Instead, a young, exhausted-looking public defender named Theodore Whitman walked in, carrying a thin manila folder. He didn't offer a sympathetic smile. He sat down across from her, dropping the folder on the scratched metal table. "Where is Reginald?" Vivian demanded, her voice shrill, bordering on hysteria. "Where is Victor Langham? I need to post bail immediately. The food here is inedible, and the woman in the next cell has been screaming for hours." Victor Langham is currently facing an emergency inquiry by the Illinois Attorney Registration and Disciplinary Commission, Whitman said flatly, pulling out a legal pad. "He has recused himself from any association with you to save his own license. As for your husband," Whitman opened the folder and pushed a thick stack of stapled documents across the table. "He sent his corporate counsel from a major firm. They dropped these off for you." Vivian looked down at the documents. The bold, black lettering at the top of the first page seemed to swim before her eyes. "Petition for dissolution of marriage." He's divorcing me?" she whispered, the blood draining from her face. "He can't do that. We have a prenuptial agreement. I get half the estate." "You had a prenuptial agreement," Whitman corrected her, tapping his pen against the paper. "Section 4, paragraph 2, contains a strict moral turpitude and public disgrace clause. By committing a string of felonies on high-definition video and turning the Ashford name into a national punchline, you triggered a total forfeiture of spousal support and asset division. Your husband has already frozen your joint accounts. You have no money, Mrs. Ashford, which is why you are talking to a public defender. Vivian stared at the public defender. Her mind was unable to process the absolute catastrophic totality of her ruin. In a matter of hours, she had gone from a multi-million-dollar mansion and country club luncheons to a concrete cage in utter destitution. "What about my bail?" she choked out, tears of genuine panic finally spilling over her cheeks. "Judge Whitfield officially denied bail an hour ago, citing you as an extreme flight risk," Whitman replied, gathering his papers. "You're going to be waiting out your criminal trial right here in general population. And Mrs. Ashford, the district attorney is out for blood. They are charging you with 3 counts of perjury, 1 count of evidence tampering, and filing a false police report. They are offering no plea deals. You are facing a mandatory minimum of 5 to 7 years in a state penitentiary." Vivian opened her mouth to speak, but only a dry, rattling sob emerged. She slumped forward, burying her face in her hands, the harsh fluorescent lights of the lockup buzzing relentlessly overhead. The untouchable socialite was gone. Only the inmate remained. In the months that followed, the spring sun was shining brightly over the newly expanded headquarters of Ellison Landscaping. What used to be a small operation run out of a leased garage was now a massive, state-of-the-art facility featuring a fleet of brand-new, customized commercial trucks. Marcus Ellison stood in the main office looking at the architectural blueprints for a massive commercial contract he had just secured with a downtown hospital. He looked healthier. The gray shadows of stress had completely vanished from beneath his eyes. The fallout from the trial had been a seismic event in the city. The civil rights lawsuit Lena Whitaker filed under Section 1983, targeting the police department for false arrest and malicious prosecution, had been explosive. During the depositions, Lena completely dismantled Detective Harlan Reese. She proved a devastating pattern of racial profiling and sloppy police work. Rather than face a public, protracted, and humiliating federal trial, the city of Chicago settled out of court for a staggering sum. Detective Reese was placed on unpaid administrative leave and quietly forced into early retirement, his reputation in ruins. The lawsuit against Vivian Ashford was even more brutal. Lena sued her for intentional infliction of emotional distress, defamation, and malicious prosecution. Because Vivian's assets had been stripped by her divorce, Lena went after the only thing she had left, the equity she had tied up in a private trust fund prior to her marriage. The civil judge awarded Marcus a substantial sum in punitive damages, effectively bankrupting Vivian for the rest of her natural life. The money was life-changing, but Marcus didn't use it to buy sports cars or mansions. He poured it into his business. He bought the best equipment, paid his workers top-tier wages, and started a community initiative to provide free landscaping and structural repairs for low-income elderly residents in the South Side. When the local news covered his charitable work, his business exploded. He went from begging for contracts to having a months-long waiting list of premium clients. The chime of the office door snapped Marcus back to the present. Lena Whitaker walked in wearing a sharp cream-colored suit, a triumphant smile playing on her lips. "You busy, CEO?" Lena asked, taking off her sunglasses. "Never too busy for the woman who saved my life," Marcus smiled, walking around the desk to give her a warm hug. "What brings you out here?" "The final settlement paperwork? I already filed those yesterday," Lena said, pulling a folded newspaper from her designer tote bag and tossing it onto Marcus's desk. "I came to deliver the final chapter. I thought you'd want to see it in print." Marcus looked down at the front page of the Chicago Sun-Times. The headline dominated the page, accompanied by a bleak, unflattering courthouse photograph of a woman who looked like a ghost of her former self. Socialite Vivian Ashford, sentenced to 5 years in state prison for perjury and fraud. Marcus read the first few paragraphs. The criminal trial had been swift and merciless. Victor Langham, trying to salvage his own career, had actually testified against his former client, detailing how she had lied to him in his office. The jury deliberated quickly. Judge Whitfield, presiding over the sentencing, had delivered a blistering address about the rot of privilege before handing down the maximum sentence allowable by law. 5 years in a maximum security women's prison, with no possibility of early parole for good behavior. "She tried to appeal," Lena noted, leaning against the doorframe. claimed she had severe emotional distress and temporary insanity. The appellate court threw it out in minutes. She was transferred to the state penitentiary early that morning. Marcus stared at the photograph of Vivian. She looked hollowed out, her hair graying at the roots, her eyes wide with a permanent hunted terror. He felt a brief, fleeting flicker of pity, not for the monster she was, but for the pathetic reality of what she had become. But the pity vanished as quickly as it came, replaced by the memory of the cold steel handcuffs biting into his own wrists. Hard karma, Marcus murmured, folding the newspaper and dropping it into the recycling bin beneath his desk. The hardest kind, Lena agreed, because she built the cage herself. Marcus walked over to the large bay window of his office. Outside, his crew was laughing, loading pallets of premium flagstone into the back of a gleaming white truck emblazoned with the Ellison Landscaping logo. The sun was warm, the sky was clear, and the future stretched out before him, bright and unblemished. "Let her rot," Marcus said softly, turning his back on the window and looking at his attorney. "We have a city to build." The terrifying ordeal of Marcus Ellison serves as a chilling reminder of how easily the scales of justice can be tipped by privilege, prejudice, and performative victimhood. The courtroom, meant to be a sanctuary of truth, was nearly weaponized into an instrument of destruction. Yet the story also stands as a powerful testament to the inevitability of hard karma. In an age where digital footprints and hidden lenses are ubiquitous, the truth has a remarkable, relentless way of clawing its way to the surface. Vivian Ashford's spectacular downfall from a multi-million-dollar estate to a concrete prison cell proves that arrogance is a fragile shield against irrefutable reality. Ultimately, malice burned the architect of the lie, while the man who stood firmly in his own truth walked away to build an empire, proving that integrity, though severely tested, remains the strongest foundation of all.